Good morning, everyone. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and you've got gas. The morning edition where we rock it off with the Oldsmobile V8. That's right, Oldsmobile V8 engines came out in 1949. Overhead valve design, and it was a vast improvement over what had been available in the, well, I guess you could say performance market. Because really, there wasn't a performance market before that. Now, we all know Ford Flatheads revolutionized the automotive business by coming up with a V8 for a low-cost car. The Flathead V8 came out in 1932, and it was an amazing engine for the time. A simplistic one-piece block, flat cylinder heads, valves in the block. It was simplicity. It was typical Ford. It stayed in production until 1953. But the competition was catching up, closing in, and passing them by. One of the first was the Oldsmobile 303, the Rocket 88. Now, a lot of people don't think of that as a performance engine today, but in the day, in the time when it came out, it had 35 more horsepower than the Ford V8. That was a huge amount. Plus, the Oldsmobile body that it was used in, the 88 model, was pretty lightweight. It basically shared its configuration with the Chevrolet. A little bit longer wheelbase, a little bit longer front fenders, but from the cowl back, basically the same body as the Chevrolet. This ain't your dad's Oldsmobile. Yeah, it's right. That's right. It's not. Oldsmobiles did change. So in 1949, Oldsmobile and Cadillac come out with two V8 engines, overhead valve engines. Now, they're both considered the Kettering design, which was an engineer for General Motors. But the Olds and the Cadillac do not share anything. They are not the same engines. So they are considered Kettering because he was the lead engineer in engine development. But they are not the same engine. They don't share parts. They're not interchangeable. And the Cadillac had different displacements. So let's talk about the Oldsmobile, because I've always liked the Oldsmobile models. I always liked the Oldsmobile branded cars. I remember when the Smothers Brothers, now for those of you old enough to remember the Smothers Brothers, hi there, Jason and Jill, how are you doing? From Otana, I believe I said it right, Minnesota. Good morning. All right, so 303 Oldsmobile engine came out in 1949. It is considered by those in the know to be the first muscle car. The Rocket 88 is what the car was called, and that's how they marketed the engine, as the Rocket 88. They didn't want to use the engineer's name, which was Kettering, so they called it a Rocket. Perfect timing. Everyone was going space age at the time. They put little bitty fins on the back of the car. They had the V8 engine. 135 horsepower stock with a two-barrel carburetor. And a weird-looking two-barrel carburetor as well. If you look at my page, you'll see the pictures of it. It has a solid top. It actually drew air in from the side, although it was a downdraft carburetor. Interesting. Good morning, Bobby Z. How are you doing this morning? All right, so the 303 Oldsmobile came out in 1949, 303 cubic inches, stayed in production for just a few years, 4 years. So the 303 engine, hydraulic lifters. It was an over-square bore-stroke combination motor, produced from 49 to 53, 135 horsepower. Now, the Cadillac, as I said, had a similar engine, but they weren't interchangeable. Although they were Kettering engines, basically. The first engines, Charles Kettering, the engineer. All right, the 303, two-barrel for the first generation. But they decided it needed more horsepower. So the second 303s, they bumped the horsepower, they bumped the compression on them, and it bumped up with a four-barrel the following year to 160 horsepower. Now, they had low compression, basically 7.5 to 1 when they first came out. They bumped the compression up just a little bit more and got it all the way up to 160 horsepower in 1952. 49 to 51, two-barrel, 135 horsepower. The horsepower wars are starting to come on. Oldsmobile sees it. They bump it up, 160 horsepower. That is more than anybody else on the market right now. 160 horsepower, and they lead NASCAR for 4 years. Most wins. until the famous Hudson Hornet. And the Hudson Hornet, I don't know what it was about that engine, 324 cubic inches. That thing was a powerhouse. It was still a inline six-cylinder engine, but it worked great. Jason said, did some of these early 50s Olds have plexiglass hoods? The show version did. The one they actually had on the show floors had a plexi hood so you could see the engines underneath. It was a really neat idea the marketing guys came out with, and a couple of other manufacturers did the same thing. But no production cars had the plexiglass hood. It was strictly done for show purposes so you could see the engine while the car was on display at auto shows. All right, by the time the 303 went away, they had bumped the compression ratio up to 8.1, and it was 165 horsepower. Still an amazing engine for the time, and in the lightweight body, it's considered to be a muscle car. Well, in 1954, the cars got bigger. Oldsmobile stretched it out. Bigger body, heavier car, needed more horsepower. They came out with a 324 cubic inch engine. Now, I remember a cousin of mine having one of those with the Hydromatic automatic transmission. Man, that thing was smooth and powerful. So they increased the bore size to 3.8, and it had the same bore size as a 283 Chevy. Yes, the Chevy had shorter stroke. All right, so 324 cubic inches came out in the Rocket 88 and the Super 88s, 8.25 to 1 ratio, compression ratio, 170 to 185 horsepower. Pretty good, 1954, and they kept on going. 1955 model, they upped the compression to 8.5 to 1. Gasoline was now getting better. It could stand the extra compression. Morning, Neil. How are you? And Bob Bruns. How are you? So they upped the compression to 8.5 to 1. Still, by today's standard, that's low compression. But it was high for the time, and 185 horsepower is what they got. Now, the old 88 had 202 horsepower. They're getting up there, 1955. They went to skirted pistons, and they had a reputation for failing due to the cast aluminum skirts separating from the steel inner bracing. They fixed that. They got away with it. Now, that engine lasted through 1956. In 1957, they bumped the cubic inches up. Now we're getting some big motors, and the drag racers really latched onto the Oldsmobile engine. As a matter of fact, I know a few guys that ran them even through just, a decade or so ago. Ken Bates Jr. in his junior fuel car with a real Olds Rocket 303. And he had that in a junior fuel car. Didn't quite do what they expected it to do, but I'll tell you what, it was a true nostalgia machine. Yes, Mark McGeorge, the dual H power Hudsons were quick, but because of the low slung body, they handled a lot better. All right, so 1957, Oldsmobile jumps it up. It is setting the pace with a 371 cubic inch engine. They used that same engine through 1960. So 3-year run on that motor. And in 59 and 60, the 371 used green paint on the valve covers, as the others did, and had 9.25 to 1 compression ratio. And they had a 10 to 1 compression ratio for 277 horsepower. Or you could get 305 horsepower. They had a 3 2-barrel version. Now, even the 2-barrel version, the base 2-barrel version, was 265 horsepower. Raphael, what do you got to say? Oldsmobile Rocket 88 was also beautiful to see. Spark plugs were covered. Yes, they were. They passed through the valve cover covers right on top. Good morning, Jim Nye. How are you doing this morning? Hope to see you this weekend at the Corvette Cruise. All right, so the Oldsmobile motors putting out some horsepower. They were used in some of the GMC GMC heavy-duty trucks in the 370 cubic inch, they said, at 232 horsepower. 355 foot-pounds of torque. That baby was strong. Now, the J2 Rocket was the real performance engine. Now, it's introduced in middle of 1957. The J2 Rocket had 3 2-barrel carburetors. They were 2 barrels with a twin choke. Only the center carburetor was mechanically connected to the throttle linkage or the throttle pedal. The others were equipped with a choke, the center one had the choke. The outside ones did not have chokes. So the top of the carburetor didn't have the provisions to put a choke in there. The carburetors did not open progressively. They were either open or closed, period. The J2 engine also had a slightly thinner head gasket, raising the compression to 10 to 1. It was advertised the gross power was 312 at 4,600 RPM. Still relatively low by today's standards, but again, you got to remember, back in those days, man, there was nothing on the market like it. The J2 option was a hefty $83. $83. 3 two-barrel carburetors. A real performance engine. The problem was, it never liked to pass a gas station. It never found a gas station it didn't like. All right, now they started increasing the engine size again. The 394. This was the Olds big block. This baby was huge. 6.5 liters from 1959 to 1964. And it was available in almost any Oldsmobile you had. You could get that optional engine. The 394s used a two-barrel carburetor to start with and had 315 horsepower. The compression ratio, though, was reduced, 9.75 to 1. The 394 replaced the 371 in the 88 and the 98s for 59 and 60. A detuned version was used in 61 is in the Dynamic 88. So that was a low cost. The Dynamic 88 was the base model Oldsmobile you could get into. Now there was what they called the Skyrocket. Now that was introduced in 1963 and 1964, was a high compression 4-barrel 394, 10 to 1 compression ratio, produced 325 horsepower in 1961. The 62 to 64 version had 330 horsepower. Still, super powerful, and it showed on the drag strip. They were quick. Now let's go backwards a little bit. 303 was the size of the first V8 engine from Oldsmobile, but along with Buick, they saw a need for a small V8 engine in their compact cars. So the 215 cubic inch aluminum V8 was developed in 1961 through 1963, a very short run. Little Buick aluminum V8. Now the Olds shared the same block, but the Buick had the nailhead style. And again, Buick had what they called the nailhead style, where the valve covers sat parallel. And they called it nailhead because of the design of the valves and the way it looked. Oldsmobile had a normal configuration cylinder head that we're used to seeing with the valve covers on an angle. The Oldsmobile engine was very similar to the Buick, but not identical. It had a larger wedge-shaped combustion chamber with a flat top rather than a dome piston. 6 bolts rather than 5 bolts per cylinder. So again, the basic blocks were the same, but there were some differences and changes made. It had an actuated by shaft rocker arms like the Buick. Now, Pontiac was supposedly getting one of these, but I've never seen one. Oldsmobile had 8.75 to 1 compression ratio with a 2-barrel, and the Olds had 215 with the same rated 155 horsepower. But the Oldsmobile got the optional turbocharger. Buick did not get that. The Buick engine lives on today, basically. Buick sold the rights to the engine or gave the license to build that engine, and a number of companies have, including Rover. Rover continues to build that little aluminum V8 engine. They bumped it up in size. They've made it stronger. It's ended up in the MGs and the Rover SUVs. So I talked about the turbo rocket for a little bit. Here it is, 1962 and 63. Oldsmobile built a turbocharged version of the 215, designated the Turbo Rocket. It had a Garrett Air Research turbo, and it really put out the boost. But it was high compression. Now, what they did to combat the high compression and the turbo lag is they used water injection or alcohol injection. No one thought about that. They didn't fill it, and there's where the detonation would occur, and that killed the motors. Hi, Mike. How you doing today? Yes, the motor to the 215, Jeff Stillwell, you're right, absolutely. 215 sold by British Leyland. And, you know, one of the things I'd love to get a hold of is an MGB GT V8. Those things are just so nice. That aluminum V8 engine, much lighter than the 4-cylinder lunk that's in there. And with a 5-speed, that is a sweet machine. All right, so Oldsmobile, Rocket 88. Oldsmobile, one of the oldest brands in the General Motors portfolio, but one of the ones that dropped out early. And the Oldsmobile brand disappeared in the 1990s. It was a great car. It had great engines. It led the way to performance, horsepower, and muscle cars. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got gas, the morning edition. And, we talk about cylinder heads. These guys, Valley Head Service, one of the best in the business. As a matter of fact, if you got a small block Chevy and you want something really exotic, talk to Valley Head Service. They have their own design 4-valve Hemi heads that fit on a small block Chevrolet. They run them on their race car to show how performance and reliable they are. Check them out. Valley Head Service. They'll work on that 303 Oldsmobile for you, too. They can get it running real good. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You've got Gas, the morning edition. Thanks for tuning in. Share it. Let your friends know about gas. I hope they enjoy the morning gas. I hope you do, too. We're going to get back to doing the evening gas soon. I've talked with Randy Cardoon. We're going to try and get Joe Walla and Anna Octane back on board and go back to evenings with gas. Hope you enjoy it. You are a gas-aholic if you're watching us this morning. And people like Moon Eyes, Service Tech, Equipment Sales, BUA, Beach Underwriting Associates, and a host of others help bring gas to you each and every morning. I'm Hot Rod Bob. You have a great day. I am. Hope you are too. And lots going on. Let me know what kind of a car cruise you're going to attend this weekend if you're going to. I know I will. We're going out with the Corvette Club this weekend. We're going to have some fun, Corvette style. You do too. Take care, folks. Have a great day. I'm Hot Rod Bob, and this was your Morning Gas.